A seasoned martial artist smirked and called out to the man mopping the floor. "Hey you, want to show us your moves?" Coach Leon called out, standing in the center of the training area, his dark belt catching the glare of the overhead lights. "I bet you've never even seen a real match up close, have you?" Across the room, Devin Brooks paused. He tightened his grip on the mop, then slowly raised his gaze. He was only 18, new to the job, just a few weeks into working evening shifts as a cleaner at the dojo. Usually, he came in after the classes ended, when the mats were quiet and the air still smelled of sweat and focus. But that night, the advanced session had run longer than usual. "I don't mean to interrupt," Devin replied, quietly, returning to a stubborn scuff on the edge of the mat. "I'm just here to clean up, so you can carry on." A brief pause. "Have you ever experienced something like this? Let us know in the comments, and where you're watching from. Your story matters too." A longer pause. One of the older students, Rico, let out a dramatic laugh that echoed off the gym walls. "Look at this guy," he snorted, scared to even step on the mat. The rest of the group chuckled, though a few seemed unsure whether to laugh or cringe. What Rico didn't know was that Devin had spent the last 2 decades trying to erase a part of himself. 20 years since he'd last entered a cage, since the night that changed everything. A lifetime ago. A past no one, not even his teenage daughter, knew. "Come on, bro," Rico taunted, swaggering closer with that smug expression he wore to rattle new students. "Just a little demo. Bet you can't even hold a stance. Why don't you show the crew here what separates a warrior from a janitor?" Devin felt it. That old flame, like a sleeping nerve snapping awake. His eyes locked with Rico's, just for a heartbeat. And in that brief exchange, Rico flinched, just slightly. But it was enough. "Just for education," Rico muttered now, his tone shifting, as if trying to cover the sudden tension. "Just a small example, to show why we honor the practice." Devin set the mop down, then rose. Every movement smooth, too smooth, for someone who had supposedly never stepped onto a training mat. Around the room, gloves stilled, footwork froze. Everyone felt it. Something had changed. "That's fine," Devin said softly, his voice still and deep, like the hush before a thunderstorm. "But when we're done, you'll say sorry to everyone for turning this mat into a joke." Rico scoffed, but it didn't land the same way. "Say sorry? Man, you'll be apologizing to the floor after it kisses your face." But none of them knew. Devin Brooks was once Devin Iron Veil Brooks, a 3-time undefeated world champion in hybrid martial arts. He vanished from the fight world at the peak of his career, after a tragic accident took the life of his closest friend in the ring. Since that night, he had sworn never to fight again. But some promises are meant to be broken when dignity is on the line. If stories of strength, injustice, and redemption speak to you, make sure you subscribe and follow along. Because what started as a moment of mockery was about to become the biggest lesson of Coach Dreck's life. A brief pausa, with a smug grin, Dreck tugged on his black belt, stretching the moment as if the spotlight fed his ego. "All right, everyone," he called out. "Gather up that you're about to see why martial arts has a clear hierarchy." Devin watched as 8 students lined up around the mat, forming a half circle. Some appeared eager, anticipating the so-called demo. Others looked away, visibly unsettled. Near the back, a young woman with a tight ponytail leaned toward her partner, murmuring something under her breath. He shook his head, disapproval all over his face. A brief pausa, Dreck continued, hands flying theatrically. "See this?" he said, gesturing toward Devin. "This right here is the perfect example of someone who doesn't belong. There are places meant for people like him, and this dojo isn't one of them. But I'm sure you all get what I mean." A pausa più lunga. Devin felt that old tension press against his ribs. The same sharp pressure he'd felt 2 decades earlier, when people in the crowd judged fighters like him before they even stepped on the mat. Only now, at 42, he knew how to redirect that fire into something greater than fists or fury. A brief pausa. "Coach Dreck," the young woman spoke softly. "Can we get back to our lesson? This doesn't feel right." He snapped his response. "Are you questioning my method, Celine?" Using her full name. A tactic of dominance. "Sit down and observe that you'll learn more in 5 minutes than in a month of drills." Devin noticed the way she froze. That flicker of fear in her eyes was all too familiar. He had seen that same fear in his own reflection, for 20 long years. Every time the memory of that night jolted him awake. The night Miguel Blitz Herrera died. His closest friend, his sparring brother. Gone because of him. It was a practice session. Too much pressure. Too many hateful voices screaming from the stands. He'd lost control. And one of his strikes had knocked Miguel down. The fall, the angle, a freak moment, but not one he could ever forget. A brief pausa, the court called it an accident. But Devin knew better. He'd let his rage speak instead of his discipline. A lunga pausa, and now, Mr. Mop, Drex said mockingly, why don't you show my students how to hold a basic stance? Or is that too tough for someone whose only weapon's a floor squeegee? Laughter broke out. Too loud, too forced. Devin didn't move. He closed his eyes, and suddenly, he was back in that cage in Atlantic City. The same noise, the same slurs, the same moment before everything shattered. What's wrong? Drek pressed, starting to circle him, like a lion playing with prey. Gonna just stand there, like you do all day, next to that mop bucket? That's when Coach Drek made his first serious mistake. He gave Devin a light shove on the shoulder, a simple nudge. But it reeked of entitlement. The kind of arrogance born from never facing real consequences. Devin didn't budge. His body stayed firm, feet anchored to the floor like deep steel rods. Drek pulled his hand back, shaking it slightly, as if he'd just pushed a brick wall. For a brief moment, his cocky grin faltered. Interesting, Devin murmured, more to himself than to Drek. It's been a long time since someone tried to poke the bear. A brief pausa. There was a shift in the room. Not because of anger, but because of the sudden stillness in Devin's voice. The kind of stillness that comes after surviving storms that no one else ever sees. A pausa narrativa. Drek, clueless as ever, laughed it off. Did you all hear that? He said, raising his voice. He thinks this is interesting. How about we teach him the difference between being curious and being prepared? What he didn't realize was that every word, every smirk, was stirring something inside Devin. Not rage, not revenge, but memory. Sharp, precise, undeniable. The memory of who he used to be before the guilt, before the hiding. Celine watched from the sidelines, fists clenched. There was something strangey in the way the janitor was breathing, controlled, measured, his muscles, barely visible under the loose uniform, tightened in waves. It reminded her of the nature documentaries she loved. Big cats, waiting in the shadows just before the pounce. A brief pausa, last chance, tough guy. Drek said, the irritation clear now. You either take this demo like a man, or I'll call security. Let them toss you out. And let's be honest, say goodbye to this job too. Devin opened his eyes, slowly. When his gaze locked with Drek's, the coach took a step back. He didn't know why. But something in Devin's stare made the air colder, like he'd just poked a creature he thought was a lizard, but turned out to be a dragon. A brief pausa. All right, Devin said at last, his voice low, but full of a weight that demanded attention. But when this is over, you're going to tell your students why you turned a place of honor into a carnival of shame. Drek forced a laugh. It cracked at the edges. Explain? He scoffed. You're the one who'll be explaining how you ended up flat on your back. A pausa lunga. What no one in the room realized was that Devin hadn't spent the last 20 years just running from his past. He'd been mastering something far more dangerous. Control. The kind of control that transforms rage into focus. Each insult only sharpened it. Every humiliation added another brick to the foundation of a silent storm knew how to unleash only when it mattered. His old rivals feared it. And Coach Drek was about to meet it, head on. A brief pausa. Drek straightened up, chest puffed. The gym had gone quiet. His 8 students stood in a perfect circle around the mat. Some leaned forward, hungry for spectacle. Others turned their eyes to the floor, uncomfortable with what they were about to witness. My friends, what you're about to say is worth more than 6 months of training, Coach Drek declared with theatrical flair, arms spread wide like he was about to summon lightning. This is the difference between those who dedicate their lives to the craft and those who just wipe down the mats they'll never deserve to stand on. A brief pausa. Devin stood still, centered in the middle of the ring, but his breath had shifted. His eyes closed for a beat. And suddenly, he wasn't in that Portland dojo anymore. He was back in Atlanta. National championship. 22 years earlier, backstage, moments before his title match against Ivan the Wall Korolenko. and above the roar of the crowd, he remembered one voice cutting through. Look at this little black boy. No way he survives 3 rounds with a real fighter. Alunga Pausa, Devin had ended that match in just 2, but the victory came with a steep price. The pressure, the hate, the weight of always having to prove he belonged. That was the night everything spiraled. The night after, a sparring session turned tragic. A strike too hard. A fall too sudden. And his training partner, Miguel Herrera, never got up again. A brief pausa, and now, Coach Drek, pacing like a jackal around him, was tossing the same kind of fuel into a fire Devin had buried for decades. All right, cleaner, Drek spat. Why don't you demonstrate for Usho not to hold a guard? Or is that too hard for someone whose only technique is pushing a mop? The mockery echoed, but before Devin could respond, another voice broke the air. Firm, clear. Can I ask you a question? It was Lena Park, barely 20, a purple belt in jiu-jitsu, graduate student in sports psychology. For 2 years, she'd been documenting discrimination in athletics for her thesis. What she was seeing tonight wasn't just data, it was personal. A brief pausa. Why? She asked, still holding her composure. Do you think humiliating someone doing an honest job's part of martial arts? The silence was ice cold. Drek turned slowly, his eyes narrow, caught between disbelief and irritation. Excuse me, Lena, he said. Who's the instructor here? You are, she answered evenly. But this isn't instruction. This is humiliation. Wrapped in disciplinito, make it look acceptable. A pausa lunga. Some of the students shifted, exchanging glances. No one had ever stood up to Coach Drek like that. He felt his face flush, part rage, part something else he didn't want to name, and he laughed nervously. This has nothing to do with race, it's about respecting the dojo and knowing your place. Devin's eyes opened slowly, and something in Lena's courage, her calm defiance, took him back to his little sister, Nia. The same fire, the same refusalto let injustice stand unchallenged. Nia had died at age 10, caught in the crossfire off a chaotic night in their neighborhood. Devin had been abroad, competing in South Korea when the news reached him. And he'd never been the same since. One more reason walked away from everything, from titles, from fame, from the spotlight. Alunga pausa, Drek leaned in. Now, his voice low and cutting. Lena, if you don't respect my methods, maybe this isn't the club for you. There are places, he added with a twisted smile, more suited for people like you. The words lingered in the air like poison, like smoke before the fire. Lena felt a chill run along her spine, but she didn't move. I've paid my dues here, she said firmly, and I believe everyone deserves to train in an environment built on respect, not ridicule. A brief pausa, and then Devin did something no one saw coming. He smiled. Not nervously, not with submission, but the slow, deliberate smile off someone who just remembered had nothing left to hide. A pausa narrativa. For 2 decades, he'd carried the burden of guilt. 2 lives lost, both tied to his time in the unforgiving world of combat. And now, watching a young woman defend values he had once abandoned, Devin Brooks began to remember who he really was. A brief pausa. Drek, he said, his voice low, steady, but filled with an authority that turned every head in the room. She's right. This isn't about martial arts. This is about you, trying to feel powerful, tearing others down. Coach Drek spun around, his face flushed with a cocktail of rage and disbelief. How dare you lecture me about martial arts? You don't even know what a dojo is. Devin stepped forward, and with that one step, everything shifted. His shoulders squared, his stance lowered, his feet aligned in a way that any trained eye would recognize instantly. Alunga pausa. Actually, he said calmly, I know exactly what a dojo is, and this stopped being Oni long time ago. A pausa narrativa, a cold ripple ran through Drek's back that he didn't understand it, but his instincts did. The way Devin now moved, the way he filled the space that it triggered something ancient, primal, but pride refused to let him back down. Enough talking, Drek growled, sliding into his favorite stance. Let me teach you respect the old-fashioned way. A brief pausa. Lena stood frozen, her heart racing, but her mind analyzing. She had studied hundreds of hours of fight footage for her thesis, and now, in front of her, a man once dismissed as a cleaner was moving like the legend she had only seen in black and white archives. Minimal motion, controlled breath, a stillness that radiated power. Devin closed his eyes for a moment and let 22 years soft muscle memory rise to the surface. Every strike refined, every defense earned, every ring, every alleyway, every bruise turned into wisdom. When he opened them again, Drek was staring into the ice-off Devin, Iron Veil Brooks, that five-time world champion. Unbeaten in the cage, feared on every continent. A pausa lunga, last chance, Devin offered gently. For her, for your students, for this Placido become a place of growth again. Drek barked a laugh, but it cracked halfway out. Please, you'll be the one begging when you're on the ground. But Drek couldn't see what Devin already had. The high guard, too open at the ribs, the instinct to retreat in the right leg first, the subtle twitch in his shoulder before every hook. A brief pausa, 2 decades out of the game hadn't dulled Devin's skills. They had sharpened his eyes, his mind. And Drek was about to learn what true control really looked like. Lena noticed it first. The others were slowly edging back, not with fear, but with instinct, like animals sensing the pressure drop before a storm. There was something in the air now, dense, charged, electric. A brief pausa. People were still laughing at Drek's latest insult, but the room had already shifted. And on Devin's face, something began to form. Not fury, not vengeance, but calm, solid. The calm of a man who had just found something worthy and not break a 20-year silence for. A pausa narrativa. Some in the room can't quite explain it, but they felt it. That what they were about to see was not normal, not staged, not safe. Coach Drek dropped into his usual stance, the same one he used to scare first-timers and make them doubt themselves. Feet aligned, arms locked at chest height, weight pressing forward. The stance of a man who learned to fight in predictable settings, against controlled opponents. Devin didn't move. Not at first, he just watched, measured. His eyes traced every flaw. The raised elbows, the unstable feet, the shoulders drawn too tight, telegraphing every next motion. A brief pausa. You gonna move, or what? Drek said, bouncing slightly. Or just stand there like a statue in work boots? Then, Devin moved. A lunga pausa, not a leap, not a flourish, just a shift. His feet repositioned, his center dropped, low and balanced, his shoulders leveled out, relaxed yet ready. To the untrained eye, it looked like almost nothing. But Lena, who had studied movement and performance for 2 years at university, felt her entire body react. A pausa narrativa. She had seen this before. In the greatest fighters, that terrifying moment when a human being ceases to be ordinary and becomes something else entirely. A predator, coiled, precise, deadly. A brief pausa. Interesting, Drek muttered. For the first time, his voice didn't sound sure. There was something in how Devin stood now, how he owned the space, that bypassed logic and struck deep into instinct. Devin stepped forward, and without thinking, Drek stepped back. Just half a step. But everyone saw it. A black belt retreating from a janitor. And in that moment, everything changed. A pausa lunga. The dynamic of the entire dojo shifted on its axis. Devin's voice cut through the silence, low, measured, undeniable. Something wrong? He asked. Drek felt a heat rise in his face. His reputation, his authority, his entire identity was being challenged, right in front of the student she once commanded without question. He couldn't back down now, even if every part of him, every instinct, was screaming to stop. To walk away. To apologize. No, Drek said, forcing a tight smile. I was just admiring your stance. He chuckled. Did you learn that from a YouTube tutorial? A pausa brief. No one laughed. The silence in the room felt thick, heavy, like something was about to crack. A lunga pausa. Actually, Devin replied calmly. I learned it at a place called the Atlanta Combat Institute. Maybe you've heard of it. Drek's face tensed. The name sounded familiar, but he couldn't place it. Atlanta? Huh? He scoffed. Some weekend boot camp? In the corner, Lena slowly pulled out her phone. Quietly, she typed, Atlanta Combat Institute MMA champions. She barely blinked before her breath caught. IT wasn't just any GYM. It was the gym, where legends were made, where champions trained, where Devin, Iron Veil Brooks had built his name. A pausa narrativa. Devin took a small step forward, his voice still low, but unshakable. Last chance, Drek. Apologize to Lena for questioning her right to speak. Apologize to your students for turning this dojo into a sideshow. And most of all, apologize to yourself, because you've become exactly the kind of man that martial arts was meant to prevent. The offer hung in the air. A quiet door dignity cracked open. Drek could have taken it. He could have stepped back, shown humility. But pride, poisonous pride, closed the door. He attacked. A pausa lunga. The punch was flawless. Textbook jab. Direct, fast, sharp. The kind he'd thrown 1,000 times. Sun-compliant training partners. But Devin wasn't one of them. A brief pausa. The move came like liquid lightning. Most of those watching didn't even understand what had happened. Devin had simply moved. His body flowed sideways, like water slipping around stone, and Drek's fist struck only air. His balance broke. His arm dangled in the void. A brief pausa. Not bad, Devin said quietly. Already reset. Already grounded. Clean form. Decent speed. But you gave it away with your right shoulder. Drek spun, eyes scanning. How the hell did he move like that? Beginner's luck, he muttered, but even he didn't believe it. A pausa narrativa. He charged again. Jab, cross, hooked at a tight combination. His signature, polished, powerful. That a move he'd used to finish dozens of sparring matches and impress wide-eyed rookies. But Devin was gone. Again. This time, Lena saw it happen. A brief pausa. Devin had dipped low, just enough for the jab to graze the air above his head. Flawless timing. Minimal effort. And in that instant, she understood. Devin wasn't fighting. He was demonstrating what control looked like, what mastery felt like, what martial arts truly meant. The jab met only silence. Devin leaned back, just enough, his torso shifting in a way that seemed to defy basic physics. And when Drek fired off the hook with all the force he had left, Devin simply stepped back, the punch slicing the air millimeters from his chin. A brief pausa, clever combo, Devin noted calmly, his breathing unchanged. It works well on people who don't move. But your left side, he added, is wide open every time. A pausa narrativa. Drek was sweating now. Real sweat. Fierce sweat. He had thrown thousands of punches in his life. This should have been routine. But nothing, not one shot, was landing. And this cleaner was still standing like he hadn't even warmed up. Stop dancing and fight. Drek shouted, unleashing a flurry of wild, angry strikes. A pausa lunga. That's when Devin decided. The lesson had gone on long enough. Drek's third wave. A mix of kicks and fists. Missed entirely. Again. But this time, something changed. When Drek reset, breathing heavy, Devin was already closer. Too close. How? Drek whispered, realizing too late had lost control of the distance. A brief pausa. Drek, Devin said, his voice quiet. Now just a hand's reach away. You want to know the difference between fighting in a gym and fighting in the real world? Before Drek could speak, Devin moved in a wind-up, no effort, no warning. Just a simple push, the heel of his right palm placed gently against Drek's chest. A lunga pausa, but the result was anything but gentle. Drek flew. Not stumbled. Not fell. Flew. His feet lifted off the floor like he'd been struck by a wave of sound. He hit the ground 2 meters back, flat on his spine, with a thud that silenced the room. A pausa narrativa. He lay there, staring at the ceiling, eyes wide, not in pain, but in disbelief. What had just happened was beyond strength, beyond technique. It was mastery on a level he had never known existed. This, Drek muttered, trying to sit up, this is impossible. A brief pausa. Lena hadn't breathed in 10 seconds. In all her studies, watching tournaments, analyzing biomechanics, breaking down world-class footage, she had never seen anything like that. There was no rage and no violence. Only precision. A clinical, controlled execution of something she had only read about in history books. A lunga pausa. It's not that complicated, Devin said softly, extending a hand. Once you understand leverage, timing, and how energy moves through the body, it becomes simple. I spent 22 years learning how. Drek ignored the gesture. He stood up slowly, legs trembling, breath unsteady. 22 years in what? He asked bitterly. Scrubbing floors. But Lena answered, barely above a whisper. You don't understand who he is, do you? Everyone turned toward her, still clutching her phone. On the screen, headlines, photos, videos, all pointing to one truth that their eyes now confirmed. Devin, Iron Veil Brooks, world champion, unbeaten, vanished, returned, and now, standing in front of them, he had taught the most important lesson they'd ever receive. Without violence, without ego, only honor. Devin Brooks, known in his prime as the Iron Veil, stood quietly as Lena began reading aloud. Five-time world champion in mixed martial arts, widely regarded as one of the most technical fighters the sport has ever seen. Undefeated, retired after a 22-year career, vanished after the tragic death of his training partner in an accident that shocked the world. Alunga pausa, the words hit the room like thunder. Drek's face lost color. His posture collapsed under the weight of the truth. He hadn't mocked a janitor. He had publicly insulted a legend, a man who could have dismantled him with a single move, and chose not to. A five-time world champion. A pausa narrativa, Drek stammered. All the bravado melted away. Devin gave a slight nod. I retired at 29, he said softly. Since then, I've taken whatever jobs came my way. Cleaning, repairs, maintenance, no cameras, no trophies, no need to prove anything to anyone. A brief pausa. What followed was difficult to watch. The fall of pride, the unraveling of ego. Drek was no longer the loud instructor. He was a man who had just realized how deeply wrong he had been. I didn't know, he whispered. If I had known. Devin raised a hand, gently. But would it have mattered? Would you have treated me differently only because of who I used to be? Or would you still have humiliated another man who didn't have the belts, the titles, the voice to speak back? A pausa lunga. That question landed harder than any strike that it pierced through Dreesen a way no physical blow could. His sin wasn't ignorance, that it was arrogance, believing that value could be measured by uniforms and social status. A brief pausa, Lena stepped forward, her voice steady, her hands calm. For 2 years, she said, I trained here respecting your position. But what I witnessed today wasn't teaching, it was bullying. Wrapped in disciplinito, make it seem legitimate. A murmur rippled across the students. Heads nodded. Whispers exchanged. Everything they thought they knew was now under review. The revelation of Devin's identity had shifted everyone's perspective. A brief pausa, Drek looked at Devin. And for the first time, his voice carried humility. I sincerely apologized, Tio Lena, everyone here. I have no excuse. Only regret. Devin nodded. The same quiet composure that had defined his movements now shaped his forgiveness. It's appreciated, Drek, but an apology is just the first step. The question is, what will you do next? Alunga pausa, Drek looked around. Really looked, the students, the faces. Some were disappointed, some were confused, but many were watching him with new eyes. I will change, he said quietly. It'll take time, but I'll change. A brief pausa. Then Lena asked the questiono one expected. Mr. Brooks, would you ever consider teaching again? Because I think we'd all learn more from someone who knows that true strength comes with responsibility. Devin smiled. For the first time that evening, a genuine smile touched his face. Maybe, he said, but not to teach how to fight. To teach something far more important. That respect isn't earned with belts or titles, it's earned through character. A pausa narrativa, as Drek stood there, swallowed by the weight of the most humbling lesson of his life. One question remained. Would a single night of humility be enough to undo decades of pride? Or would real change require something deeper? Alunga pausa. 3 months later, everything had changed. The dojo was no longer the same. Devin Brooks was no longer just the quiet man with a mop. He was a presence, the mentor. Lena Park had convinced the club owner to hire her officially as an instructor, specializing in advanced technique and martial philosophy. A brief pausa. As for Drek Mitchell, he lost half his students within 1 week. A pausa narrativa. The video, quietly recorded by Lena, spread like wildfire online. A black belt, humiliated in front of a crowd, by a man who once mopped the floors they walked on. His reputation in the martial arts world was shattered. Alunga pausa. Without Devin, Lena said one evening after teaching a class on humility, I never would have learned that real strength doesn't need to be loud to be recognized. Devin gave her a quiet note as he packed his training gear. The best lesson I can give you, he said, is this: never judge someone by their job or by how they look. Everyone you meet has a story that might surprise you. A pausa narrativa, Drek continued to teach, in a much smaller dojo, with far fewer students. And a humility hadn't chosen, but had been forced to accept. He learned the hard way that arrogance has a price. Sometimes, justice doesn't arrive with thunder, it comes silently, like a storm made of steel. A brief pausa, Devon proved something greater than any victory in the cage. That true revenge is not about destruction, but about showing that greatness comes from within, from how you stand when no one is watching, not from medals, not from rank, from who you choose to be. A lunga pausa, conclusion per voiceover. If this story resonated with you, subscribe to the channel to discover more real stories of extraordinary people who turn humiliation into triumph.